I'd like to introduce myself. I'm David Nabarro, and I have the honor of being the moderator for today's event. And just as we're settling down and getting going, I wanted to do a very brief introduction. I also want to welcome one or two people who've come to join us. So let's just straight away welcome Katie Hayes, who's here sitting just past Britt Ray, who's part of the advisory board for the program we're going to be talking today, and Dr. Naima El-Gassir, who has been a long-standing colleague in the World Health Organization, who's joining, and we really pulled her in actually outside the door. Thank you for joining us. We know you have to leave soon, Naima. Thank you. What we're going to do is to have two panels that are going to be informative, then a break in between the two of them for some questions and answers. And we're conscious that a lot of people are juggling with different meetings, so some of the panelists are not here yet, and other panelists will speak on a panel and then leave, but that's perfectly okay because everybody here knows that this is a place where there is so much going on. Now, climate change is a risk multiplier for mental health. It's compounding the likelihood of mental health challenges, and it worsens the outcome for people who are living with mental illness. And evidence and action on the intersection of climate change and mental health is growing really rapidly. But progress is not easy. And today we're going to hear about a Wellcome Trust-funded Connecting Climate Minds project. And we're going to be giving you a kind of midstream analysis of what's coming through. It's work in progress. And many of the people who've been involved in Connecting Climate Minds have contributed to today's sessions, and some will actually be speaking. Let's start with a video that describes some of the experiences that people have with regard to mental health in relation to climate change. A video that's come through the work that's being led by Dr. Renzo Ginto, Planetary Health Program Director at St. Luke's in the Philippines. And you'll hear in a minute just why this is such an important video. Let's see if we can show it now.
We have been going back again and again to how many lives has been lost during Super Typhoon Haiyan, how many livelihood has been lost during Super Typhoon Haiyan. During Super Typhoon Haiyan, I have seen hopelessness of the community. I have seen the loss. I have seen the devastation. I have seen the helplessness. We literally went back to zero. There was no basic human right when there is a disaster. You don't have a house, you don't have clean water, you don't have food, you don't have basically all the little things that we enjoy when there is no disaster. We don't have that. We can't even play as a child, we can't even enjoy our rights to education because there's no school. We can enjoy our right to protection, to development, because at that time you're only thinking about survival, you're only thinking about how are you going to move on from this disaster. As for me, when Super Typhoon Haiyan happened, I knew that my family would not be able to support me in college because our number one um, livelihood at that time was fishing. And well, the sea was very monstrous at that time. After 6 months after Super Typhoon, the waves are just so big that our fishermen couldn't go to the sea, and a lot of our fishermen lost their fishing boats and other fishing equipment. We were isolated for 3 to 5 days. So we didn't have any food, we didn't have any water, we didn't have any access to sanitation and hygiene, we didn't have any access to medicine. well, there wasn't any avenue for people to really process their trauma because the main thing is survival, you know. The main thing is to be able to have food and water for the family. When you have not processed that trauma, then it makes you more vulnerable to the next disaster. I know people who have committed suicide after surviving super typhoon when there was another typhoon that came because they don't know what to do. Trauma, it freezes you out. You when you are having that panic attack when there is another disaster because that brings you a lot of memories from the past, it immobilizes you. Then you don't know what to do. And so for me, it's really important, even up until now that I'm in the US. Like North Carolina has hurricanes, and it's not that bad as it is in the Philippines. But whenever there are hurricanes happening, even if it's just, winds or like rain, a lot of rain, it gives me the trauma and it immobilizes me. I don't know what to do during those moments because what I'm experiencing is just a trauma that I have from 10 years ago that haven't been processed and the anxiety that comes with that. So I think empowering people and capacitating people includes really how to process the trauma and how to process the losses and the devastation that they have felt. We have to continue lobbying with the government and advocating for greater mental health services because we deserve that. It is our basic human rights and our mental health matters. And so we have to continue talking about it and collectively heal and collectively share things that made us stronger, even if those are painful experiences. I think the collective hope and collective pain makes a person not isolated, and we need all of that support. And if that will be coupled with proper services coming from the government, institutionalizing mental health services, and making sure that people know where to go, people know how to access them, people know that they are not free, they're not another burden to our everyday lives. Instead, that is a help from the government to our community members, so they will be stronger whenever typhoon comes.
Big thanks to Marinelle Ubaldo for that extraordinary testimony full of such richness that comes from her experience. And that's at the heart of Connecting Climate Minds. It's about people, about their experiences, and about ways in which their resilience can be increased as climate change bites more deeply into society. Now we're going to hear now from three of the people who are involved in Connecting Climate Minds. They're going to talk about it. I'm going to ask them now to come and sit in the three central chairs here. I'd like to invite Dr. Emma Lawrence, Dr. Renzo Ginto, and Dr. Britt Ray to come up and join me here. And Emma's going to talk about the Connecting Climate Minds effort and give a global perspective. Renzo is going to give an analysis of the regional work. As I said, he's based at St. Luke's Medical Center in the College of Medicine in the Philippines. And then we've asked Dr. Britt Ray, who is the director of another resilience initiative, this time at Stanford School of Medicine, to talk a bit about the lived experience working group in Connecting Climate Minds. We've allocated 7 minutes for each person to make their remarks, and without more ado, I'd love to really give a warm welcome to Emma Lawrence, please. Yeah, you go up there. Yeah. It's not very lit.
Thank you so much. Is there a clicker? No. Perfect. Thank you so much, and it's an absolute pleasure to see so many familiar and new faces joining us, and welcome to Connecting Climate Minds. So, climate change and mental health, we've heard many times already at this COP, and that in and of itself is a very exciting and new thing to hear mental health talked about at a COP, and we've heard how climate change is a risk multiplier. You just heard so powerfully the many ways in which a climate hazard, a climate event can worsen the conditions for good mental health and create traumas and create experiences that lead to post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, substance misuse, suicide. And the research is building and showing in that evidence of the risks, the deep risks of the climate crisis for mental health. But conversely, climate action is an opportunity multiplier. And that's why it's also so vital to connect mental health into COP and into the climate agenda, not only to protect mental health from the escalating emissions around the world and these numerous disasters, but also to see the opportunities to create a world that's better for our mental health and well-being through greening our cities, cleaning our air, strengthening our communities, etc., etc., etc. So through Connecting Climate Minds, we've heard stories around the world that you'll hear from my fellow panelists, and they echo the stories in the literature. We've heard about farmers sadly dying by suicide as another drought hits and another crop fails. We've heard about new things like people being trapped and socially isolated in their homes as heat escalates, and that leading to worse outcomes for people who are already in mental health services or who are needing to access mental health support or not able to access mental health support but feeling increasingly isolated and anxious. We've heard from young people about how they're feeling hopeless and despairing as their futures are mortgaged to pay for record profits in coal, oil, and gas today. So this can produce a vicious cycle that we've heard is incapacitating health systems and healthcare workers who are increasingly carrying this burden, and frontline workers and emergency workers and individuals and communities who are the ones who need to be, as the IPCC reports say, participating in action, that actually adaptation and mitigation will come through the resilience of communities, and that has to include psychological resilience so they have the capacity to continue to cope and act. So we need to flip this from a vicious cycle to a virtuous one, where we create opportunities to build social connection and psychological resilience that can enable sustained climate action, and that in turn can improve the conditions for mental health and well-being. So this is why we need climate and mental health work in general. So there's been an escalation of work in the last few years, and that's really exciting, and it's really exciting to be at a COP talking about this. But there are still some challenges. We know that there are still disconnections across sectors and disciplines, that there's incredible work happening around the world that we're not always learning from. We're not always understanding the way mental health is being described in different cultures, learning from different wisdoms. It's unequal. The research is predominantly in the global north, and that's where the evidence is, but the impacts are mostly in the global south. And it's siloed. There are still silos in policy making where health and mental health is not fully integrated into decisions about climate change and vice versa. Mental health is not part of most adaptation plans. So what do we need? Fundamentally, we need connection. We've heard that, and Anna spoke so powerfully yesterday about the power of connectedness, and that's what we're doing at Connecting Climate Minds. So this is a welcome-funded project to bring people together across the climate and mental health space, across research, policy, lived experience, practitioners, civil society groups. What are we trying to do together? We are trying to create inclusive, actionable agendas for research and action to set the scene for the field of climate and mental health for years to come. to show what we can all do if we work together. We're creating connected communities of practice that are both creating and will be able to be in a better position to enact these research agendas, and creating resources that will all be showcased on a global online hub to be launched in March next year. You'll hear more from our wonderful colleague Renzo in a moment about the work of the regional communities of practice, but just to note that there's structure. There's 7 in the regions Renzo will discuss, all of the Sustainable Development Goal regions, and all of them have a regional community convener, but also co-convening organisations, a lived experience advisory group, and youth ambassadors. Anna is one of our wonderful youth ambassadors you'll hear from later. And these interface and bring together an amazing network across the region. So what have we done so far in the project this year? We have held 14 virtual dialogues in the regions. First was on understanding the needs, like some of the stories we've heard, that powerful story already. And then from all of those insights, working together to generate research themes. Where could new evidence best make change in policy and practice? The second was on how do we do this? What are the principles that should guide research in this space? How do we translate evidence into policy and practice? What's needed in terms of capacity building, in terms of funding, in terms of support for these communities to thrive and enact this agenda? We've also held 3 virtual and 4 in-person dialogues for young people, Indigenous communities, and smallholder farmers and fisher people. So altogether, over 500 people have been involved in the dialogues, representing over 80 countries around the world. We will be launching our global online hub in March through a virtual and in-person event based in Barbados, and we've heard about the impacts affecting small island developing states like Barbados and the mental health consequences of that at this COP. We will be launching the research and action agendas and case studies and many more lived experience stories like you've heard, so 40 altogether. So with that, it's my great pleasure to welcome Renzo, who will be speaking more about some of those insights we've heard already.
Thank you very much, Emma. And again, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be here. I play 2 hats actually in this project. One is as a convener or a lead for the Regional Community Development Group. And we have representatives from the different regions really trying to develop a strategy on how to make sure every region is heard, every region has an imprint into this global project. And so I hope that we've been successful in trying to really capture the regional nuances, community stories through this project. And I'm also privileged to be the regional community convener lead for Eastern and Southeastern Asia. And a while ago, you heard Marinelle in that video. She is actually one of our live experience advisors. We have 5 coming from different countries in the region. We also have a youth ambassador, and we have 6 other co-conveners, different organizations. So I think the lesson that we are already learning from this project is that we're not just connecting climate minds, we're already connected climate minds at the regional level, but also between regions. And so here you're seeing the map. Emma already mentioned that we follow the regions of the Sustainable Development Goals. We thought that this is the most appropriate, division. We can't just say we have one Asia region, because Asia is quite a massive region of many different subgroups, subcultures, subregions. So here, and one, I'll not be able to enumerate the different regions and the main conveners, but also this map does not capture the many co-conveners involved in each region. So, there's so many actors and players and organizations involved in this process. And while I'm the one representing the regional perspective at COP28, I think our goal should be in the next COP, every region of Connecting Climate Minds should be represented. Isn't that a great goal? And then So here, we're giving you a snapshot of what we've been doing for the past several months. Of course, we're, as mentioned already by David, it's a work in progress. In fact, all the regions now are working hard to finalize the different research questions, research themes that have emerged from the dialogues. We're now conducting surveys with, for example, in my region, nearly 200 people from the youth sector, from academia, policy and practitioners, civil society advocates, because we want to make sure that the research agenda that emerges from the region is really a co-creation of the different stakeholders that will constitute this community advocating for climate and mental health in the region. So that is the Zoom's screenshot of our one of our dialogues. You can see all the Jamboards. It's a busy Jamboard. Just shows to you how rich the conversations were, in the regional dialogues. And again, a testament that, when we develop research agendas, now is the time to do it through a bottom-up approach. Usually, we're very used to a group of folks meeting in an fancy hotel, developing an agenda for the rest of the world. This one is different because the communities, the regions have made the agendas, and now they will be synthesized, they will be connected to build a global research agenda for climate change and mental health. You can see those cartoons. So we even had cartoonists documenting the conversations. And in the coming weeks and months, we will be releasing more knowledge products, articles, featuring not only the words, but also those pictures that captivate and capture the stories and the ideas and the thoughts coming from the members of a region. I guess in summary, and maybe later on we'll have more time for discussion, we should not underestimate the wisdom that comes from the communities, the ones in the climate front lines, the civil society advocates, the young people in the indigenous communities, and later on, our partner Britt will be talking about these different other communities with lived experiences. They are the ones living in the regions. Sadly, they couldn't be all in these kinds of convenings, but they can contribute meaningfully to the shaping of regional and global agendas. Hopefully, in the next couple of months, you will see our agendas and you will see a lot of commonalities. Regions are saying climate and mental health, it's already visible and palpable in the different countries and regions of the world. But also, you will notice that there are differences, whether based on culture or, for example, in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of recognition that we need to draw from indigenous knowledge systems and various religious traditions if we want to come up with culturally sensitive and appropriate mental health interventions for those affected by the climate crisis. So I'll stop there now. Thank you very much, and I hand the microphone to Britt.
While Dr. Britt Ray is coming, I do want to introduce her just before she starts. Welcome to all of you who've come. I see people have come in the interval. Crowd to the front if you feel like it. And after Dr. Ray, if you want to make any comment, we will have space to do so. So this is Dr. Britt Ray, who is actually, as well as being a Stanford academic, she directs something called Community-Minded Interventions for Resilient Climate Leadership and Emotional Well-Being. But actually, the acronym is beautiful because it's CIRCLE. And what a clever acronym. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Nabarro. That's incredibly kind. I am thrilled to be able to be here with you all today to represent some of the work that we've been doing on the Lived Experience Working Group thus far. And something that drives all of the work that we've been doing together is the fact that we know we really need to center the experiences, yes, but also the capacity for the most impacted people to be co-leaders, co-developers, implementers of the research that will eventually lead to interventions that address the unique stresses that they're experiencing in the climate crisis, not only to alleviate mental health challenges, but also to find ways of spreading and scaling the already culturally embedded forms of resilience that are deep within them, that we now need amplified more widely than ever before. And so what we did was a pre-scoping exercise in order to find particularly impacted communities who we could then run further sets of dialogues with in order to really get a feeling and a flavor for these experiences that are accruing from climate mental health challenges for them and their people. And so we identified Indigenous peoples worldwide, hugely heterogeneous group, of course, that's difficult to summarize, but also youth, and smallholder farmers and fisher people. So I'm now going to just jump into some of the findings, and please excuse me for reading because I don't want you to miss some of the texture of what these people are telling us, which is crucial for us to gather the importance of. Okay, so when it comes to youth, we held both virtual and in-person dialogues, globally virtually, and then in Port Harcourt, Nigeria, and Bangalore, India, with 150 18 to 29-year-olds. And this series of dialogues really surfaced the profound impact of the burden to mental health in our youth today that the climate crisis has caused already. And so we enabled for sharing and emoting together about the psychosocial spiritual impacts that they are describing, which include wide reports of feeling hopeless, powerless, particularly when climate events such as floods and droughts turn their lives upside down, and they can become harder pressed by compounding fears about when the next climate event might rob further opportunities from them, wondering about what could possibly go wrong next. And these psychological impacts are really heightened when many young people feel that they are just left underserved in terms of having mental health supports available to them. And this amounts to a general sentiment of neglect for their lived experience. So this is really heavy stuff that the literature is really only just starting to describe. And many young people also report feeling the general stress that we are familiar with in terms of climate anxiety, for instance, grief, anger, that can become so severe that it disrupts daily functioning, that it can impede one's ability to really access and complete key milestones, such as accessing and continuing education, let's say, or being able to form relationships, or even plan families, as the thought of having children, being able to safely provide for them in a climate-changed world can appear to be an overwhelming task. And since many young people are acutely aware of the threats that they face in the climate crisis, they're also often powerful agents of activism to stop it, right? And so they're typically looked to as the beacons of hope by power holders, by older generations who are going to fix this mess. But this can then load much more burden on their shoulders for solving a crisis that was not one that they themselves created, which amounts to a form of intergenerational injustice that needs to be addressed and corrected. So the problem also is that many will hesitate to then describe this form of heaviness because when they've tried before, they've been belittled, they've been dismissed, they've been gaslit in different forms, or been told that they're being overly dramatic and that they need to cheer up, which will then lead to a sense of isolation, alienation, leaving young people feeling worse off, or they don't share because they don't want to overburden other people in their loving circle of friends and family who are also going through traumatic experiences because of extreme weather events. So care is certainly needed. They told us resoundingly that they need safe spaces to be able to have these brave conversations about how the mental health impacts are accruing in their own lives, to share frustrations and grievances, but also to be able to work to the far side of grief and the far side of despair, where community salve can be found, where finding oneself in a group of caring others who feel the same then becomes a resource, a catalog by which to identify actions that people can take together, which then buffers against the worst impacts of climate distress. Okay, now they also understand that climate action leads to improved mental health, and this is a no-brainer for youth, that the main intervention involved is climate action profoundly, and they want more opportunities to step into that role. So when it comes to the Indigenous dialogues, we had 2 virtual global dialogues as well as 3 intercommunity dialogues with Indigenous peoples across Peru, Cameroon, and Kenya. And there's a deep interconnection between mental health, ecological trauma, and cultural losses. Many ecological changes that are occurring are directly threatening Indigenous peoples' mental health already. For instance, grief for sacred spiritual sites that are disappearing, or forms of intimate relationships to landscapes that are shifting, hindering one's ability to carry out traditional roles that ancestors have for thousands of years, which is then spiritually damaging, for instance. And because climate change has already caused loss of access to some medicinal plants and healing methods that many Indigenous groups use and rely on, these forms of spiritual disconnection are then leading to discrete mental health issues, emotional distress, and so on. But there was also a resounding, hopeful message throughout the dialogues that upholding the critical role of traditional knowledge to protect well-being is a solution, and a solution that's within reach. So Indigenous communities, of course, possess grounded knowledge of ecological practices and coping mechanisms for navigating environmental disruptions that have been passed down for generations, which play a pivotal role in mitigating the mental health impacts of climate change. So recognizing these, preserving these, finding ways to spread and scale these in any mental health solution, strategy, funding mechanism is really essential for fostering and fomenting their resilience. And then it came up time and again that strengthening land stewardship is really a mental health intervention. That it's a crucial protective factor in the face of climate change. This means that including and protecting Indigenous land rights, claims to land back, for instance, it's not just important because of ecological concerns, but it really does help address at the root what will help to protect and preserve Indigenous mental health. And because many Indigenous peoples have been adapting to ecological traumas from the environmental pressures caused by colonization for centuries already, this rise of climate anxiety in the general public at large for many Indigenous peoples can feel like deja vu, as the Potawatomi scholar Kyle White tells us. But this time around, many more people are affected. But there's a deep expertise then that Indigenous peoples have been facing through time about what it means to adapt and survive through environmental pressures that come from external sources of danger that you are not part of creating. And it brings a new light to who is expert in climate adaptation today, and how can that also be spread to achieve more of it. And last but not least, with our farmer dialogues, my apologies there. Farmer dialogues, yes, thank you. We had a virtual dialogue and with smallholder farmers, farm workers, and fisher people. And most of the climate-related mental health impacts they're already experiencing pertain to livelihoods, the threat of losing them, and existential pressures about what it means to be able to harvest enough crop to, for instance, pay back loans that have been taken on to be able to continue their livelihood in increasingly harsh conditions, which can become psychologically crushing and leads to the kinds of suicidality that we've seen many times in this community. And so the increase in climate events also is disrupting farmer, farm worker, fisher people's access to crucial public services like school and medical care. And just to wrap up here, a quote from one farmer participant in Kenya described a pervasive sense of distress by saying, "There are frequent droughts here, and it's scary for farmers. They're worried about their farms. What will happen? They're coming to terms with the fact that livelihoods will be lost, and so am I. I am scared. With the rain coming, will I wake up and find that my house and farms have been destroyed? Actually, this has already happened to me before. Cattle have died. Hospital workers were not able to get to work. It's mentally draining, and it's all related to climate." So they're well aware of these challenges to their mental health, but there's a lot of stigma in farmer communities and rural communities predominantly for accessing care to mental health. So there was a desire for anonymous helplines that people can access privately. Also, crop insurance systems to safeguard against their loss of livelihood, and just general primary care for health, which is otherwise scarce in many rural communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just apologies to Britt for not quite being able to keep track with her with the slides, but we got back on track.
No problem, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a moment now where if you'd like to ask any of the three presenters to clarify, please do so. We will then quite quickly go into a panel with others where we will talk about what this might imply for policymakers and other actors. But would anybody like to comment or question about the evidence that they've heard so far? If you just say your name, and we were hoping we would have a microphone or two, and here they come. So Omnia will give the microphones out. Please just say who you are. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this amazing panel. My name is Beth. I'm from the International Federation of Medical Students Association. It was really great to hear what you all had to say. My question is, what can we do in our local communities to kind of mitigate the effects of kind of climate change that's having on mental health among our populations? Thank you.
Great. We will take three. So to the lady behind. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So thank you so much for the panel. My name is Hajar, I'm from Morocco, and I'm doing a PhD in mental health and climate change. So it's finally the side event that has exactly my topic. I have a question about this specific section about farmer dialogue. Have you had any specific mention of differences between farmers and women who are in the community of farmers? Because from my experience in the field, I heard experiences from women talking about a relationship between self-esteem and water scarcity. So less they have access to water, less they have self-esteem, and they cannot be more comfortable in intimacy. So this is very specific, and I would like to know if you've heard about that before.
Thanks for that super specific question. Gentleman in the front row there, if you can get it over. Yep.
Hello, my name is Lasha Guguadze. I come from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. I'm just really touching the issue related to MHPSS in general, because we know that it's stigmatized. It's not, so it's really associated with stigma, particularly if we try to connect with climate and then related substance. So it really can create different type of obstacles within the community. So I was just wondering if we could include in certain barriers that there existed stigma related to MHPS. I really like the title Climate Minds, because it does not reflect to a certain, misunderstood concept of MHPSS or mental health or psychosocial condition within the community. Unfortunately, this is the reality. So I think it's really nice. The climate
Thank you.
minds.
Great stuff. Can I, could you be super quick? Thank you. And then we can pick up again. Thank you very much.
So I am Damian from Argentina. I'm part with the Climate and Health Foundation, and I'm a pediatrician. I wanted to know, between the dialogues, a personal touch. I work with kids, and I wanted to know if there was a difference between the virtual dialogue and the in-person dialogue.
Virtual versus in-person. Thank you very much indeed. So if it's okay, we start with Emma, and then go Renzo and Britt, and I will try to make sure we stay reasonably on time. Emma, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So to the first question about what can we do in our communities, one of the things that I found striking about the dialogues was in stories from around the world, one of the differences people said again and again between whether individuals and communities were resilient and could take action, or whether their mental health was severely affected, was the strength of their community, the strength of the social support, whether they had people around to care for them, and whether they had opportunities to take collective action. And one Indigenous woman actually I met in Africa Climate Week was talking about when she was a kid, and if a disaster struck, she said, actually as a child, I found it quite a fun time because all of the community came together in such a strong way. And that's what I've seen again and again, is that can really make a difference. So and we see that for mental health as well. There's this big parallel. We talk about the loneliness epidemic. We talk about the impact of isolation from COVID on people's mental health. So there again are these parallels between what we need to do in strengthening our communities for climate adaptation and climate action, and giving opportunities for people within that space, but embedding mental health support within that. and seeing the community as a mental health intervention and equipping people with what is needed for mental health. And that links to the second question around women and farming. And there's an amazing woman farmer I met in Kenya, actually Britt connected me to, who became a clinical psychologist after the impacts on her and her communities, and now runs, there's a case study that will be featured on our global online hub called the AgriPsych Beam Enhancing Access to Mental Health Services for Smallholder Farmers and Rural Communities. And she's equipping communities, and community leaders, many of whom are women, to support the farmers in those communities, because in her research, over 30% have clinical level anxiety and depression because of the impacts that are happening. And many of the farmers are themselves women. And we've sadly heard tales of, to link to your self-esteem issue, that they're being blamed, maybe by themselves or maybe by other people around them, for reduced crop yields. And that is leading to increases, anecdotally, we're hearing of domestic violence and things like this, gender-based violence. So obviously that is hugely traumatic, has a big mental health effect. So these things are all linked, but women have a big place in these communities within often church communities, and they're being sort of a frontline, equipped as a frontline through these kind of case studies. So we'd love to teach people more about this kind of amazing work through our global online hub. Sorry, I'm trying to remember the next question was on stigma. Yes, so he's had to leave, I think, but the stigma point came up time and time again, actually, as well, and understanding how mental health is discussed around the world. But sometimes climate can be a way in to also talking about mental health more generally, because these are collective experiences, and so it's sometimes easier for people to talk about how they're feeling in the context of a climate crisis, which then can lead into discussions around mental health and mental health problems and mental illness more generally. And obviously there's a difference between people experiencing a sort of a clinical level mental health problem and people experiencing that are particularly vulnerable in climate situations to the wider community well-being, but they also interlink. So stigma is something that is very much featured in our research and action agendas, as something that needs to be understood in the context of how it is a barrier to accessing care in general, but also as care needs to happen more and more in the context of climate disasters. And yeah, I'll leave the point to Britt to talk about the difference between pop-ups and virtual. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Well, very briefly, to just reinforce what Emma has already mentioned, and I really want to answer the question on intervention and the question on stigma. When it comes to intervention, one recurrent theme that we are observing from our quick reading of the different dialogue, transcripts and outputs is that there's an appetite for more hope and strength-based approaches rather than approaches that focus on the doom and gloom side of climate. For example, people are talking about how education can be, or climate education in particular, can be made more empowering rather than paralyzing. Now climate and health, for example, or climate in general is being taught to even young kids. And how do we make sure that the education that they receive on climate can actually not just improve their mental health and well-being, but also make them act and address, climate issues in their surroundings, in their environment. And then when it comes to stigma, I think one recurrent theme is that there is a need to depathologize our climate reactions. Feeling not okay about, what's happening around us is okay. And maybe that is the opportunity for integrating climate and mental health to actually destigmatize mental health in general, as you were already alluding to. So yeah, I think those are some themes, and I think there are opportunities actually to reorient and rearrange the discourse around mental health.
Thanks, Renzo. So to your pertinent question about what we can do, the good news is that there is so much we can do right now to equip ourselves to protect against these effects. So there's decades of research showing that it's people who are in communities that have the most what's called social capital. So social trust, social connectedness, and the ability to achieve shared goals together in the places where they live. those quality and depth of relationships actually mean that those people will go through acute extreme weather events, for instance, and then come out the other side with a lower psychopathology, significantly lower post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, maladaptive coping, substance abuse, and so on, suicidality, than people who are more socially isolated and lonely. And so we can really take it upon ourselves to get to know our neighbors as though our lives depended on it, because maybe one day they actually will, our mental health and well-being as well. And so that's fantastic because it has multiple co-benefits that can scale. If you, for instance, create the depth of those relationships by having people address and work on environmental problems in the places where they live that they care about, that site then becomes an opportunity to do mental health work without even calling it a mental health intervention, which allows you to completely avoid the stigma that unfortunately often comes with this work. And so another cool thing is that it can help to alleviate the loneliness epidemic that many societies are also battling today, because again, it's fomenting relationships. And I just want to follow up that when we're talking about the emerging constructs that we know less about, like climate anxiety, ecological anxiety, grief, and so on, there's been a really interesting recent review of the literature for coping mechanisms that people report help them. And so what that has shown us is that typically a person might fall into one of three categories. Let's say you're very gut-centered and you're very externalizing of your distress by taking action. You can go and you can try and bypass all that pain by taking effective action, but you might burn out if you don't have proper internal supports to get you through the long haul of the climate emergency and what's needed, right? If you're very heart-centered, let's say, and drawn to difficult emotions, you might get lost in a crevice of doomerism, depression, despair, which damages mental health. If you're very head-centered, very vigilant, very anxious, perhaps you can't even tolerate the emotions that follow one's climate awareness, and therefore you will stick your head in the sand and avoid it at all costs. But of course, when we don't face it, we don't act, and so that's also maladaptive. And what the research has found is that it's when people go on a journey and they actually learn how to integrate little aspects of all three, so appropriate forms of action that allow them to close the gap between their environmental values and the ways that they're showing up in the world right now, which brings psychological relief, alongside appropriate emotional engagement with difficult, uncomfortable emotions, maybe through mindfulness or other forms of strategies, cultural resilience practices that allow that to be born more comfortably, and then followed up with also no longer unconsciously keeping the climate crisis away from you, but instead consciously taking breaks from it, right? Self-care breaks, so that you can be a joyous human being who is able to connect to other things that make life worth living and get us out of bed in the morning and make this experience of being here at all meaningful. So if we can help bring people on that journey of understanding and identifying ways to connect to the place where they already are, to that tripartite cycle of action, we can protect mental health and well-being, especially now as we see climate anxiety skyrocketing, particularly with our youth. And then lastly, to the issue of climate farming, right? The communities and gender that you're asking about. What we heard was that as the livelihoods are depleted and people can't stay because they can't afford to because their profession no longer exists, they then must migrate, right? This is a huge driver of climate migration. And this increases the vulnerability of women and girls to sexual violence while they're on trek, when they're moving, right? And so that is something that has come out with a gender-specific slant. And there's also been a lot of concern about not being able to pass on one's heritage to their children when you're in a long life, line of intergenerational connections of farming people or fisher people, and then your kids aren't going to be able to uphold that. And so there can be a kind of perhaps motherly aspect of that parenting concern that would be gender-specific.
Okay, I think...
That's, okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Sorry, too much to say.
Sorry to do that. Thank you very much indeed to the panel. And it's all right, we're going to continue the next panel, but you wanted to come in. But we'll come back to you, okay? So with thanks to Emma Lawrence, to Renzo Ginto, and to Britt Ray, thank you for this opening panel. Now we're going to move to a panel where we're going to invite different people to put themselves ahead to 2030 and to imagine that the research agenda that we're talking about on climate change and mental health is being taken seriously, and what contributions their organisations would be making to that absolutely important paradigm shift. And so I'd like to invite Alan Dangur, Dr. Alan Dangur, Dr. Petra Kouri, Dr. to be Salman Khan, and Dr. to be Anna Gabriela Media to come and join us up here. Thank you. So we're going to do this panel sitting from here rather than going to the lectern. It's a different style of panel. And I would like to start with Petra Kouri, who's on my left, and then I'd like to go to Alan Dangur, and then to Salman Khan, and then to Anna Media, if that's all right as an order. We're going to need to be precise on time again. The last panel was absolutely brilliant. And so to Petra, you come from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, an extraordinary federation with millions of members, and you're Director of Health and Care. Now, we're looking ahead to 2030, when connecting climate minds outcomes are put into practice. How's the IFRC going to have contributed to mental health impacts on its work with climate vulnerable communities?
Good morning, and I mean, you set the stage, you said the previous panel were brilliant, so we're going to have to meet that level of standard.
Yes.
Before I get to 2030, I just want to go back to 2019, because 2019, there was an international conference for the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And just to give you what an international conference means, an international conference is a meeting where all of the Red Cross, Red Crescent globally, with the ICRC, which is our counterpart, IFRC, and all of the governments, including the UN agencies, they meet in Geneva. And this is a conference that is more than 100 years old, and it happens every 4 years. 2019 was their 33rd conference, so we're talking more than 128 years. And it took them 128 years to decide to adopt a resolution to make mental health and psychosocial support a priority in their services. So we're glad that COP28 took them 27 years to make health important, because they are well advanced on the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. But what did that mean? And the reason I bring it here, it meant that in all our operations and all of what we do as Red Cross, Red Crescent, mental health and psychosocial support became a priority and integral. And specifically, I'm mentioning here in our emergency responses, because when we talk about climate emergencies, and that's what the Red Cross, Red Crescent mostly do in communities, is they respond. And having that commitment with their governments to put mental health and psychosocial support as part of their basic health services when they respond was a shift that was done in how we work. What did that mean? It meant that we had to develop the tools and the guidance and the communication strategy and lift it up. Now, part of the partners you saw here we have 2 centers as a Red Cross Red Crescent. One is called the Climate Center, and one is called the Psychosocial Mental Health Center, and both are centers of excellence. So what we have done is that we've looked into the interlinkages and a lot of what has been said today about developing these joint programs to support the communities. Kenya was mentioned here, I think. No, Kenya was mentioned. Someone asked a question about Kenya and about the farmers and their wives. Actually, in Kenya, one of the things we did recently is we developed peer support groups for women and youth related to climate emergencies, and specifically to support them on how they will cope when they're losing their livelihoods and how they can support their husbands in these situations and their self-esteem and the questions that were raised. So that's one example of how we do. Let's fast forward. What do we want to do moving forward? I'm going to say 4 things. One is we have to work, all of us together, on early and sustained access. Specifically, early and sustained access on mental health and psychosocial support. And when we say sustained access, we mean sustained people in these communities that have the trust and credibility in these communities. For us, the Red Cross and Red Crescent, they're more than 100 years old. They have decades of presence in these communities. But if they lack the tools and the capacity, they cannot deliver these services. They're going to have to pick and choose what services they develop. Sustain means presence before, during, and after. Our call is we want to provide early access to mental health and psychosocial support. We need to have the capacity there so that they get early. This is, MHPSS is not a nice-to-have thing nowadays. It is something that is important that we have. So jointly, how can we build that capacity? Increase that capacity of our volunteers, we're talking 17 million volunteers, we're not talking small numbers of people. How can we elevate them to provide these services and make use of their presence to support their communities? This does require funding. So the second one is about funding, working together to have funds earmarked to MHPSS and not just to food relief items in emergency situations and shelter. The same way we have all of that, we need to have MHPSS earmarked funding to support in the response mechanism. The third is preparedness, because we are talking about response, but we want to prepare. The initial, Daniela, I think was her name, when she was giving her testimonial, she said that suicide came after the second trauma. And that's because in between, no one prepared them that what's going to happen if this hits again. So preparedness. In the humanitarian world, 98% of our funding just goes for response. 2% of our funding goes for preparedness, no matter what preparedness we're talking about, not just climate. Pandemics, all of it. So imagine how scarce our funding is on preparedness. How can we shift the narrative that we need preparedness on MHPSS? The last one is multi-stakeholder approach. In medicine, we call it multidisciplinary approach. We bring physicians and nurses from different backgrounds. In this setting, the initiative here is a typical example of multi-stakeholder approach, collectiveness, and how we can complement our work, all of us together.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Petra, thank you for playing the game. Thank you for going back and going forward and for the clarity. Now we go to Alan Dangour, who is Director of Climate and Health at Welcome. Alan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here today. I'm really excited to see what's already been delivered from Connecting Climate Minds, and Emma and her brilliant team have done an amazing job. We're really proud to have supported, or to be supporting, increasingly, I note, Connecting Climate Minds. The reason we did it, of course, is because there's an almost total evidence, there's a total lack of evidence in the space between climate change and mental health. And we felt it was absolutely critical that evidence gap needs to be filled. So Welcome is for those of you who don't know, Welcome is a UK-based charity that works internationally to fund research on health. And we have 4 strategic areas: discovery research, infectious disease, mental health, and climate and health. And very lucky to be leading our climate and health work. Those of you in the room who are listening will notice, to listen to what we've just been hearing about, of course, will notice that those areas are enormously overlapping. And what's exciting about the Connecting Climate Minds and the work we're doing on the intersection between climate change and mental health is it sits at the intersection between 2 major areas of science: climate and health, mental health. It sits at the borderlands between these 2 disciplines, these 2 areas, and that makes it so interesting, because that's where real innovation will happen. That's where real opportunity to discover new things will happen, at those borderlands. We similarly work at the borderlands with infectious disease. and identifying how climate change will impact the distribution or the ability of disease vectors to move and the consequences of that. So there's really exciting work in there. And that takes me to our role as a philanthropy. Philanthropies can and should fund exactly this sort of thing. Take some risk. We've got the opportunity to take risk. I'm not saying you're risky, but but the opportunity to take risk and to see those holes, to map the landscape, identify where there's an opportunity to really build evidence. And I think that's an absolutely core thing to do, because what it also does then is it not only opens up new fields, if those fields are interesting, which remains to be a question, of course, if those fields are interesting and there is an opportunity then to build those fields, to catalyze research, to bring in other funders, to leverage support, to identify those solutions. So that's, I think, a key role of philanthropy, to seek those opportunities and think about how to use that opportunity to build new fields. Yep. So what particularly excites me about Connecting Climate Minds, and what I think is so important, what we've heard, is for me it's amplifying the voices of those people that are most affected. And that's something that at Wellcome we work very closely with. We have a whole team of people in the mental health group who work on lived experience, and that's something that the rest of science really doesn't do, or not as much as it should do. And bringing in lived experience and those voices of the people who are suffering and most exposed is really important. And the other thing, of course, is as these dialogues are happening, there's a huge opportunity to build capacity and to build understanding and to strengthen understanding in these areas. So if we look to the future, what does it mean in 2030? Well, we'll have a huge amount of research from this team and hopefully from others. And this is a really important, what I'm hoping it will be, is a really important body of evidence to drive a new field. So, but of course, we don't just want to describe the problem, we want to identify the solutions. So we have already, my colleagues in mental health tell me, a whole series of interventions that seem to work for certain mental health disorders. And I'm not a mental health expert, as you will definitely have noticed already. But the question is, will those interventions continue to work 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees hotter? Will those interventions still be sensible interventions in a changed environment? Will there be, do we need to identify new interventions based on what we're learning from these fundamental foundational pieces of research? Will we need to think more about the mechanisms of action? Well, we definitely will need to think more about the mechanisms of action, of how these interventions do or don't work under a changed environment. So I've spent a lot of today and yesterday speaking on panels about how, so this is a climate conference, and we're barged into the climate conference in order to put health at the center of the climate conference. But we, as health people, many people in the room may well be health people, need to think about it the other way as well. We need to bring climate into our health work. So there is no sensible intervention in public health today that does not think about climate from the outset, to imagine what the world will be like at 1.5 or 2 degrees hotter, so that we can imagine whether what we're planning today is even remotely sensible at a 1.5 or 2 degrees hotter world. That's absolutely core. What we need in order to deliver that, though, is the sort of work that we're getting from Connecting Climate Minds, raising the visibility of the voices, raising the visibility of these issues, crowding in new funders. When I go around and talk about the sort of work that Wellcome does, this is one of the projects that most people are excited about. So I think it's a huge opportunity and puts us in a great place for a better 2030. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. So we've heard from two people who've really stuck their necks out to get this issue more into the public domain. Now we're going to hear from two other people who've been campaigning on these issues in the recent past and may well have some further questions to ask of all of us. We'd like to go first to Ana Gabriela Mejia, who's from Ecuador and who is a youth delegate with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society's Climate Center. Ana Gabriela, I'd be very interested in your analysis of what you're seeing, and in particular in your thinking about why youth voices really have to be included in research and action on climate and mental health, and the roles that young people are playing in your experience?
Thank you so much, David. It's really amazing pleasure to be here talking with you. I was reflecting, and yesterday we had an amazing session that really brings us all together to share our reflections, to share our emotions, to share our feelings. And I want to start by saying that the climate crisis that we are living is a health crisis. But this health crisis is a mental health crisis as well. So we need to think how to incorporate these elements in the work that we are doing. This exploration poses incredible new challenges on how mental health and climate change are related, as we've been discussing, as also was shown before. And it is important to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. It is important to reflect on how everything can be translated in the recognition of social, environmental, cultural factors, and how it impacts on mental health, and how it is related in the context of climate. Because that are the main elements that we need to look at. It is important that also everyone should be included in this, in the policy making, in the decision making, because mental health is a relevant aspect across all of our lives. So that's why we should include children, we should include youth, we should include elderly, we should include people with disabilities, indigenous populations, we should include everyone, because we are experiencing mental health from different ways, and it must be taken into account in the climate context as well. So in the context of climate, I know that we as youth are constantly facing the future uncertainty, very hard emotions, climate anxiety, as you've been saying, and those personal experiences can be overwhelming. But this must be taken into account when we are discussing policy, when we are discussing and making decisions of the best interventions, because the relevance of having a research agenda that acknowledges youth voices, that acknowledges its capabilities, will definitely promote better spaces of participation, but also will help to identify the best evidence-based tools and the best evidence-based practices that can support youth mental health in the complex context of climate, because we know that this can be a very overwhelming journey. Also, youth can be great allies in the research and actions that are related to climate change, because we are more open to explore different tools, we're more open to explore different approaches, and we can provide recommendations and best practices that are aligned to our own interests and our own necessities. So that is why this can be translated into exploring from innovative approaches to talk about how to incorporate innovation, how to incorporate creativity, how to incorporate imagination in the work that we are doing in the context of climate and in the context of mental health. Besides the fact that creativity has shown to be positive effects on mental health, in decision-making, in flexibility as well. So we need to explore these new elements on how we can make these interventions more relevant for youth. And in this pathway for advocating for a research agenda, it is also a great opportunity to showcase the technical advice that we as youth can provide also to these research teams. It is important for me to highlight that as a young psychologist, I've been facing barriers to contribute significantly. And I know that this is a really relevant situation for other young people as well. So it is important that acknowledge, and I encourage you to incorporate more youth spaces for meaningful participation in policy making, and also in your research teams or in any teams that you have in your projects, to have a space for youth. But not just have a space for youth by checking a point in the list, but to actually take your time to listen to what youth can put on the table, and to listen the technical knowledge and technical expertise combined to live experiences that can lead to enrich the conversations that we have right now. Those elements are important to consider. And as I participate in the amazing project as one of the youth ambassadors of the Latin America and Caribbean region, this was an amazing format in how we can engage with senior leaders from different organizations, with professors of universities, in a very horizontal way, when they listen at us and we listen at them, and it was a peer learning, and it enriched the conversation, it enriched what the input that will go to the dialogues that will be included in the research agenda that is going to be released. And it is important because in that way, to foster these intergenerational dialogues is the only way that we can keep going and advancing to fulfill the research agenda and the objectives that we have. At the beginning, I was talking about included everyone, and included everyone includes these intergenerational opportunities for exchange of knowledge, but also for recognizing the experience that we as youth can contribute. So in that way, I want to highlight that since the beginning of the project and in all of the stages, there was a meaningful youth participation. There was meaningful spaces to contribute, to exchange ideas, and also to keep promoting elements that can be included in the research agenda. So it is a great opportunity also to combine this and to translate these main findings and recommendations to the humanitarian work that we are doing in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and that we as youth are leading in the communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And when somebody is talking such evident brilliance, it's really bad to have to interrupt them to stop, but that's just the way we are. Alan Dangour, unfortunately, has to leave. He stayed until about the last possible minute before he goes. I can see you are about to go, but I'm going to at least ask Salman to say the top words of his remarks before Alan leaves the room. He'll go in about a minute. Salman, from Mumbai, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Just to introduce myself, I'm from the International Federation of Medical Students Associations. It's a network of 1.5 million medical students worldwide from across 125 national member organizations. I'll tell you what the vision we have as future healthcare professionals. We see ourselves in a role which is not restricted to just patient care, but also solving the issues at a community level. That includes combating the stigma surrounding mental health, which is also deeply connected with the climate crisis that we are facing. I'll share a very small anecdote that I experienced with my own delegation during the preparations 2 weeks back. We had a discussion, an open space discussion within our preparations, wherein we talked about us not feeling enough to solve the climate crisis, us feeling that maybe our decisions may not be heard, us anticipating a sense of disappointment right even before coming to Dubai, and a part of us even feeling guilty about adding our own carbon footprint to the ever-increasing carbon footprint. These were the conversations that we had. But what we realized is that us as medical students and future healthcare professionals would need to take matters in our own hands, because we are directly connected to the grassroots levels. We are a part of the health systems which are not prepared to face people who are suffering from climate migration, people who are already living with mental health issues which are only being exacerbated by the climate crisis. That's the vision that we have. What we have done so far is we realized that climate change has not been incorporated into our formal education. So we decided to take matters in our own hands. As an organization that also believes in peer-to-peer learning and non-formal education, we developed modules and workshops related to destigmatizing mental health, related to empathy and communication, so that with the broader aim of us being equipped healthcare professionals, so that if a patient comes across us, we can have a conversation with them with empathy, without any judgment, and with us having an understanding of the broader picture, of us having an understanding of how different determinants of health and how climate crisis and how existing health issues are impacting the health, especially the mental health of the current generation and also generations to come. That's what we currently do. We also support activities on a grassroots level through our own system of programs, wherein we have a dedicated program on mental health that also deals with mental health concerned with other public health issues, including climate change. So we aim to support grassroots activities by medical students who reach out to their own local communities, their own peers for that matter. This was about what we have done. But what we see 7 years down the line, yes, my math is very bad, please. 7 years down the line, I see us healthcare professionals being equipped enough to stand hand in hand with other stakeholders who are working day and night to destigmatize mental health. We see ourselves equipped enough for that. We see ourselves equipped enough to collaborate and have, sustainable collaborations with stakeholders who have been working in this arena. We see ourselves meaningfully included in the decision-making process at all levels, be it local, national, or international for that matter. These are the three, vision or future roadmaps that we have ahead of us. I think I spoke too much. We've had a long day ahead, so I'll just pass on the floor back to you, sir.
What a beautiful panel. Thank you all for teleporting yourselves forward and imagining how your professional group and your organizations can contribute to a world where mental ill health is destigmatized and the necessity of mental health is seen to be part of what we need for collective development in the future. We've got a few minutes left before we close. You had your hand up before, and I'm sure you've got something to say. So if we can try the same technique to have a microphone, second, third, with just a microphone, and then if you could say who you are and do super quick questions, and we'll bundle three together. I'll invite the panelists to give whistle-stop answers, and then we'll close on time.
Hi,
you have the floor.
thank you. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Thorun. I come from Iceland. We take our disaster preparedness seriously because we need to, but I think we can use the same methods for the disaster preparedness when it comes to mental health and climate change. So I just wanted to ask, perhaps it's to Petra, wouldn't you think that it would be necessary that all healthcare come 2030 is trauma informed? Because I feel that we are always talking about trauma in one way or another, whether it's man-made or nature-made, and that we have been lacking in those services up until now. Thank you.
All healthcare must reflect the real trauma of people. Wow. To the front row, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Alessandra Resu. I'm the Director for Global Inclusive Health at Humanity and Inclusion. It's an international NGO that works on inclusion, specifically on health. on climate and health and on planetary health. And we are discussing right now how to make sure that we can train health workers to promote disability inclusion in the work they do, but also going back to the points that the panel made, how to make sure that when there is a training that is climate and health related, disability inclusion is not kept out, and vice versa. But then Salman says something very interesting. In my unit, we have ages of experience working on mental health. And for many years, we didn't do the disability inclusion mental health because colleagues and persons who have mental health conditions did not necessarily have a disability, but sometimes they do. And we didn't have that reactivity for many years. Now it's very different with the World Health Assembly resolution on the highest sustainable standard of health for persons with disabilities and the the WHO report on health equity for persons with disabilities. But then we didn't do the exercise reverse. We didn't include explicitly yet, and thanks to Salman, I will go back with this message, to make sure that that disability inclusion perspective explicitly mention destigmatization of mental health conditions. And that is, I want to thank the young people in the panel because that is really what comes from you. Thanks a lot.
Oh, they're brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. There was gentleman there, and then, yes, promise, Emma Lawrence, you get the last word. Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Kusha from the Iranian Red Crescent National Society. If I want to ask my question from my friends in RCRC movement, what is the first step of increasing the resilience of the psychosocial issues in different societies among the people? You know, because especially in that region that we live in Middle East and North Africa, we have different problems such as sanctions, armed conflict, and the other things that makes the suffering of the climate change more on the people and put them more pressure on them. What is the first step? I know it have a very big answer, but I wanna you answer me generally to that.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to invite Emma Lawrence also to come up if she doesn't mind and join me up here. Yes, but I know you were, but we've got so little time left. You can ask the question and answer it if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. I'll come up as I ask. Yeah, if you don't get to my question, it doesn't matter. We're just, obviously this year we've been listening to what the research questions might be. So I was curious to ask all of you, maybe as you're answering the other questions or to sum up, if there was one question you would like the research community to address, if you've got a burning question about the intersection on climate and mental health, or what you would need to know that would help you do your jobs. If there was one thing, I'd be interested in
What
in
a
that.
beautiful question.
I want to also just acknowledge we haven't said it yet, I think, fully enough. So I just wanted to acknowledge that the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Centre and mental health and psychosocial support centres have been key parts of the global team. They're a key partner in part of our core team for Connecting Climate Minds, and a wonderful example of how it's bringing together all of this climate expertise as well as the mental health and health expertise you've heard from today. So just wanted to really make sure everyone knew that. But yeah, I'll hand back to you, David.
Thank you very much indeed. So let's go in order to Petra, if she doesn't mind, because it's so important that you speak. And then we will go to Anna and Salman, and then I'd like to invite Emma to give us the final remarks. And we will finish in just over 5 minutes. Petra, please.
Okay. Trauma, absolutely. It is, I mean, whatever it is. I think what is challenging is standardizing. And now that we've made the interconnections between climate and health, it's bringing climate part of the health narrative. It's definitely a push to standardize the work, but trauma is at the core of the reaction. The other question was from the Iranian Red Crescent. First step, preparedness. if we don't prepare the communities on what's expected to come when the disaster hits, whether it is a climate induced, or it is a conflict induced, or war induced, or a disease outbreak induced, they need to be prepared. Response becomes much, much longer when the communities are not prepared. And it costs us lives, and it costs us much more. And then, Emma, what is the question we need to answer? It's one question. How can we make the case that there is a return on investment in preparedness for mental health and psychosocial support?
Right on. Great question.
We need the funding. In the end, if we don't show the return on investment to the funders and the donors, it is all going to be, again, response, response, response.
That's it. Thank you very much indeed. We'll go down and to Anna, please. Reactions to what you've heard.
Thank you so much. I would like to address what Kusha said. It is important, and echoing what Petra was saying, to work on preparedness, and for me is to translate it into how people understand mental health and how they can make the connection into the climate context, but with their own perspectives and with their own experiences. So, for example, for me, an activity that I did in my Ecuadorian Red Cross was with other youth volunteers. We went hiking to a local park, and then when we weren't there, I led a mindfulness exercise about connecting to nature, and then I raised the issue about how mental health and how environment and how climate change is connected. And they are young volunteers, and they were like, they didn't reflect about the connection. So it's about leading these experiences or this exercise, but from the community, from aspects that are relevant to them and that will be able for them to reflect on those elements. So I think that's one element that you can analyze in your own community, and to be aware on what would be like the best way to start pushing and advocating to make these connections and a clear understanding of it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to just Salman. Any reflections on what you heard?
Well, I would have loved to say that I don't have any reflections because my co-panelists said amazing things, and it's always tough to be the last one in a panel, you know. But on that note, I'll address the question that you asked. The research question the question that we can address is how can we fill the existing gaps in the competencies of health workforce in addressing mental health and trauma in the context of climate change and other health issues. And regarding the first step, coming from a healthcare workforce perspective, I believe the first step would be, again, being informed. Us as healthcare providers are open to lifelong learning and unlearning. That means we should be, be able to adapt to the evolving situations, the evolving literature and the scientific data that keeps on coming in every second day. So, yeah, that's all.
Nice one. Thank you very much indeed. So, preparedness, adaptation, all the things that we know are essential. Let's go to Emma for the last word, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, I just wanted to thank you all genuinely for being here. I know COP is a constant series of FOMO for all of the things that we could be at all of the time. So I just want to thank you for being here. And I just want to acknowledge and thank the many people that are in this space who have been part of Connecting Climate Minds so far. And if you haven't, we want you to join us. So we will have a global hybrid event in March. You'll be able to join many of the sessions virtually, and you'll be able to sign up to connect and find others, all of these amazing people in the room and around the world, on the Global Online Hub, see all of these research and action agendas, lived experience stories, case studies, and start to learn about some of the amazing work of the people who are in this room and all around the world. So I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this growing community, and because we need those researcher questions, we need that evidence, we need that case for support that we heard. We hope we can start to answer those, but really it's about the connections that we make where, as Alan said, that in that boundary zone where the innovations come and the ideas come, and that's really in connection. So I just want to thank you all for connecting with us today, and we go forth to connect further outside and onwards. So thank you all.
To everybody, thank you. Bye-bye, and thank you for coming. Have a good rest of the COP. Bye-bye.